Welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Thursday evening as the NBA draft has concluded. Joining us from New York City, where he attended the NBA draft, at least day one. I don't think you were at day two.
What do you
Tim
mean
Bontemps.
it wasn't at day two?
Were you at day two?
Of course
Were
I
you
was.
Were you at the Seaport?
I was at the Seaport. Our man Kevin Pelton was at the Seaport. We had a whole cavalcade of ESPN people at the
Can I
Seaport
say
today
something?
for history.
Can I say
Yes.
that I'd like to applaud Jonathan Givony, who was spectacular on our draft coverage on TV the last 2 days.
Did an
particularly
awesome
today.
job today. Did an awesome job.
Yeah,
Rattled
Givony's
off like 45 seconds on every single player instantly. It was great.
that's what I'm talking about. Like, it was like a player would come and Malika would be like, Jonathan, and he would like fire off like this tightly wound, information packed with comparisons, opinion. Like, it was like almost like it was AI. I was like, damn, Givony.
Yeah,
Like,
he did a great job.
Perfect.
Did a great job.
So congrats to that. Was great. It was great work. Anyway, we already know that he's one of our guys. Joining us from Dallas, Texas, where I guess he got fajitas watching the Mavericks pick second rounders today, is Ben MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Not only did I get fajitas and seconds, folks, I got it to go. Yes, I did.
You were that guy who went up and got the to-go box.
They offered, and they twisted my rubber arm, and I loaded up with a little to go.
McMahon was busy today. He didn't have time to sit and eat fajitas.
No, it was a busy day. They traded the draft rights to Pateri Kaponen, who I believe was on the Spurs coaching staff last summer for summer.
The Spurs always have like a 17-person summer league coaching staff. It's sort of a tradition.
By the way, old Bontemps, though, he had to go back today because he was stuck in the green room. He had some company. Some prospects, some girlfriends, some fiancés, some Bontemps stuck in the green room. So he came on back for day two.
I always liked the guys coming out of the stands yesterday. They had like they had the green room, and then they had like the golden staircase, because they had all. If you were given the kind of the wave down, you come down the staircase. AJ Johnson, come down the golden staircase to the stage. What was the favorite moment of the draft? Was it the ugly cry from Modest Pazulis from the?
Oh, man.
Well, what?
Hey, I thought it was cool.
It was cool, but it was an ugly cry. What do you want me to say? Like, that's
it was cool. I thought it was neat seeing him that excited to play for his hometown team.
That was amazing. I mean, that's the indelible memory, right? Like, that's what you're gonna. I mean, that's what I remember.
I don't think there were a lot. I mean,
honestly, you know what people are going to remember from this draft? The 55th pick. That was the most widely predicted 55th pick in the history of any draft.
This was, if it wasn't for that, this would probably be the most forgettable draft day of all time. There were really no dramatic trades. There was really no dramatic moments. It just sort of went. There was nothing that happened.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk about Bronny later on. Let's talk about the biggest mover of the week, which was the New York Knicks. We obviously talked the other night in the wake of the Mikal Bridges trade. The Knicks had to get OG Anunoby done to make that trade work, and they did. They closed the deal with him on Wednesday night. 5 years, $212 million. Below the max, which I think if he had allowed himself to get to free agency, I think he would have gotten a max offer. I don't know if he'd have gotten a max offer with player options and trade kickers.
We wouldn't have got a 5-year max offer.
Wouldn't have gotten 5. The raise. What's the max he could have been offered by another team? It was 4 years.
It was 4 for 185, I think, in the 180s. So he got about 30 million more.
So he maybe took a little bit less per year, but 5 years, trade kicker, and 212.5 mil. He's going to be
key. He got an average of 42.5 with a trade kicker and a player option. I mean, it's the most money ever given to a 3-and-D player ever. I'd say he did just fine.
Absolutely, and it was a big deal for the Knicks to get that locked down. And the reason he would have gotten maybe a max offer from Philly, maybe elsewhere, but from Philly, I think for sure, is because just he would have been seen as potentially gettable. I don't think it was like that, and the reason that it really makes sense for the Knicks to make him their highest paid player is because the other contracts are good contracts. Julius Randle's contract is a good contract. Jalen Brunson's contract is a 5-star contract, at least for the time being. He can't extend this summer, but he's going to be under that contract number next year. Mikal Bridges' contract is a 4-star contract. And because those deals are all below market, they can go this way on Anunoby and still retain all their other pieces. So you don't like that, Bontemps? You disagree?
What I do think is going forward, the idea that you can overpay somebody, I don't think you can overpay anybody anymore in this new environment where every dollar truly matters. And look, the Knicks overpaid by a vast amount in draft capital for Mikal Bridges, and they overpaid OG Anunoby by a pretty large amount in dollars in this deal. Now, as you always say,
overpaid, but the market was going to dictate he was going to get.
Perhaps it would have. If at the end of the day, if the Knicks get to a finals, and especially if they win a title with this group, this is all going to be fine.
Well, I will say this. Also, remember, the salary cap is going to go up.
I was about to get to that. So, as somebody sitting here saying OG Anunoby got a lot of money, okay, and he got a ton of money, probably too much, especially depending on what his health situation will be going forward, because he tends to be a guy that misses a lot of games. In the 4th and 5th years of his deal, the 25% max is $46.9 million and $51.6 million, according to Bobby Marks, in terms of the current projections for where the cap is going.
Let me clarify what you're saying. 5 years from now, a max contract for the fund max.
The fund max
is going to be those numbers, $46-ish million. So by the time, because I just want to clarify.
No, for sure. It's good. I'm glad you clarified it. So by the end of his deal, he's going to be under the 25% max, because while his contract is going up by 8%, the cap is currently set to go up by an average of 10%. And there are ways, depending on how much money comes into the system, it could even potentially go higher. Though I think it's safe to say it's going to go up by 10%. So
again, let me just pause here real quick. I don't mean to be annoying.
It's fine.
There's a $75 billion television deal coming on soon. Will be after the next season.
In 1 year.
So
$6 billion, but who's counting?
Okay.
That's right.
We know that is going to make the salary cap go up a lot. But after the Kevin Durant big cap spike of 2016, when all those max contracts went out because the salary cap exploded, in the new rules, they made sure that the cap could only go up a certain percentage every year to prevent the spike. But having said that, teams now know that this is going to go in, and they can budget that's going to go up. That step is going to go up. So they know that 3-4 years from now, the cap is going to go way, way up there. And that is affecting the way they're negotiating contracts right now.
After this season, the projection is the cap is going to go up the maximum as of now with the smoothing that they put in, to your point, which is 10%, which is more than any contract is going to be going up year over year. So if you're a team like the Knicks, yes, you're overpaying right now for OG. The argument the Knicks would make, I'm sure, is that over the life of that deal, it's going to grow out to be a decent contract. And if they can get Mikal Bridges and Jalen Brunson in particular to extend off their current deals, which are below market, they can maybe be in an okay situation. Now,
especially Brunson, because if Brunson does the extension this summer, he's leaving maybe $100 million on the table.
Oh, and listen, Mikal Bridges is also a guy who's underpaid on his current deal. And if he extends off it, he's probably going to be underpaid on his extension too. But that's when you bring
By the way, that's one
together,
of the reasons why Brooklyn, I think, came to the realization. I mean, they had a number of reasons why they were going to do the rebuild, but it was unlikely that they were going to be able to get Bridges to extend. Bridges was almost certainly going to let his contract expire and start over.
The idea that they were going to get stars to go play with him did make a lot of sense. Him extending off that contract with the Nets didn't make a lot of sense. None of it made sense. What made sense was to trade him. They got 1 million picks for him. They trade him. And now, because he's with the Nova Knicks over across the river, it is more likely they can get him to extend at a decent number. It is more likely they can get Jalen Brunson to extend at a better number than in a normal situation they probably would. And then the Knicks have an ability to keep all these guys together. Now, the other thing about the OG deal, real quick, to touch on, is that I think this makes it extraordinarily unlikely that Isaiah Hartenstein is going to be on this team going forward, which is a problem because he's really good. and was a big part of their success this year. And assuming they don't move on from Mitchell Robinson is a good player who fits the way Tom Thibodeau likes to play. He's also had a ton of injuries the last couple of years, and they currently don't have anybody behind him. So for as well as the Knicks have done this week, that is a significant concern, particularly given the way Tom Thibodeau likes to play, having a big that can protect the rim on the court at all times.
Agree, but the getting Anunoby and Bridges locked down, huge net positive for them. They've got other work to do, and they're still doing that. They made like 4 trades during the draft. They kept flopping all these trades. This is what they do. They do arbitrage on draft night. They traded, for example, during the back end of the first round, late on Wednesday night, they traded for in about 10 minutes, they traded for 6 second-round picks. So they went in with 2 first-round picks. They exited with 1 first-round picks in 6 seconds. Like I think they made 3 trades in like a matter of time, and they made a bunch more trades, several more on Thursday during the second round. Okay. So the Knicks have that down. They are a big winner this week. As we look towards the next couple of days, technically free agency doesn't start till Sunday, but really it's already open because the guys are negotiating with their teams. 2 very big things to happen in the next 2 days. Friday, the day this podcast comes out, is Chris Paul's guarantee deadline for his $30 million contract with the Warriors. The Warriors have been dancing around this for a long time. I don't think Chris Paul is going to play for them for $30 million this year, but the idea is, can they make a trade? Can they make a trade with Chris Paul's contract and therefore would pick up the option? The deadline is here. Now, Mike Dunleavy, their general manager, did speak today after the conclusion of the draft and left the door open that they could extend that deadline into July a little bit. We talked about this on a pod last week. The second big thing is Saturday is Paul George's option deadline to opt into his contract or not. Paul George, again, has 3 options: sign as an unrestricted free agent somewhere else than the Clippers starting on Sunday night, re-sign with the Clippers, which he can agree to at any moment, but hasn't, largely because we believe the Clippers are not offering, at least as of our knowledge right now, a 4th year or the full max. Or 3, opt into his contract, which he would only do if he was trying to get the Clippers to trade him. And one of the reasons why the Chris Paul contract is sort of sitting there is, frankly, because the Warriors are interested in being a Paul George team if Paul George wants to go play for the Warriors. Now, that as a top headline is fascinating. The Warriors want Paul George. That's a fascinating thing. That's delicious. You want to tell me more? I think that's going to be really, really hard because, number one, the Clippers are not super interested in helping out the Warriors. If they are interested, they're going to want to exact a gigantic price for Paul George.
Well, and
I don't know if I'd quite agree with this stance.
I get Chris Paul as a salary, like the $30 million salary could be useful matching, but if you're the Clippers and you're going to lose Paul George, I want my $30 million salary that I'm getting back to be a guy who can, not be on his last
right.
leg.
But it wouldn't, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into this because it wouldn't necessarily be Chris Paul for Paul George. You might use Chris Paul elsewhere.
When you're paying that kind of crazy tax money, I don't know if I want $30 million.
Chris Paul, if that happened, Chris Paul, I don't think would be on the Clippers. But what I would say is going to happen here, and this is just, I think, gaming this out, right? This is not reporting, don't aggregate me for putting a hypothetical theory on the table. But if Paul George opts into his deal, okay, I think it's going to be like when Chris Paul opted into his deal with the Clippers to be traded to the Warriors. And when he opted in, or to the Rockets, not the Warriors, excuse me.
Right.
And when he opted in, the deal was done. And he opted in and was traded when he opted in. I think if Paul George opts into his contract by Saturday, it's because there's a trade in place, and the trade will be made when he opts into his deal, and it'll be done.
Of course, because James Harden did it the other way last year.
Well, but that was different. James Harden didn't have a home. He had a temper tantrum and opted in, and then had to try to figure out what to do.
But here's something.
If Paul George opts in, it'll be like what Kristaps Porzingis did, which is
I understand, but please let me stop you. There is an enormous difference between the Chris Paul trade with the Rockets and the Clippers, whatever it was, 7 years ago, and the Warriors now. The Rockets had cap space at the time, and Chris Paul was threatening to opt out and go sign.
That's true. But you could also just say, if you don't opt in and trade me to the Warriors, I'll opt out and sign with Philadelphia or somewhere else.
I understand that, but the point is, the Rockets were getting Chris Paul no matter what. It was a matter of the structure of the way they were going to get him.
Sure.
The only way the Warriors are getting Paul George is if they work out a trade with the Clippers.
Right. And so the point is, the Clippers have not necessarily leverage, because he also has the option of saying, okay, fine, I'll just go to, whether it's Philly or Orlando or whoever, as an unrestricted free agent. But they do have leverage in the sense of saying, hey, if we're losing you and like it's going to be an opt-in and trade, there's going to have to be some significant value and something that makes sense coming back here.
Yeah. They'll get some real stuff in the deal. But yeah, look, I think if it gets to the point, my point is, if it gets to the point where Paul George opts into his deal, this isn't going to be a James Harden situation.
Yes, absolutely.
So that I'm just saying, I agree with you. It's not as clean as the Rockets Clippers one, because the Rockets, he could just go to the Rockets. But I do think it will be a similar thing where by Saturday, we're either going to know where Paul George is playing, because he'll have opted in and he'll be headed somewhere, or he'll have opted out and it's going to be okay. He's either going to take what we assume is less than the max to stay with the Clippers, or he's going to sign somewhere for the max. That I think is the gaming out of the next probably 36 hours by the time people listen.
Right. And so the real thing, let me just get this way. What do we think Paul George, there's options for Paul George that we don't know, because I have been told he has multiple, and multiple could mean two, by the way. But the verbiage that I was given was that there are multiple places that are willing to give Paul George the max. Now, that means a 4-year max contract.
Well, I mean, 20 teams could be willing to give him a max. It's just whether they could do an extended trade off an opt-in. That's all. Like a lot of teams would give him the max. Sure.
The Pistons could be offering Paul George.
Sure.
I'm going to be aggregated on that. Hypothetically, Paul George is not going to certain places. Paul George is not going to Toronto.
The Pistons would take him because he can shoot.
Let's not get bogged down in the who will offer. We know he's going to get offered a max. Does he want to take less from the Clippers, or does he want to go somewhere else and get paid the max?
There's to my mind, there's only 3 real options that I know about that Paul George really has. Stay in LA, which I would still put as the highest percentage chance of happening.
That's interesting.
Stay in LA for similar to what Kawhi got.
In Inglewood, actually.
You're right. In Inglewood.
Go to the toilet bowl, baby.
Opt in and trade probably to the Warriors. Because
we thought the Knicks were going to be an option, and they went elsewhere.
Now, maybe there's another team that's an opt-in and trade team that's a legitimate opt-in and trade team.
Yeah.
The Warriors, I know, are interested in this. Third, sign straight up with the 76ers. Those are the 3 I think most. I mean, and I am honest, I don't have the full information. There could be other avenues I don't know.
I mean, are the Magic an option?
I guess. I think the Magic are working on other things. I'm sure if Paul became a free agent on Sunday and wanted a meeting, I'm sure they would hustle up and have it. But I think the Magic are looking at their cap space elsewhere. So do you have a problem with what I just said, Bontemps?
No, I don't think so. I just think ultimately, again, I just think we're talking about on Saturday, by Saturday, I think we're either going to know where Paul George is playing, or he's going to opt out, and then he's going to have a couple options.
Okay. All right. So we're going to keep an eye on that. So on the Warriors front, the Warriors have this Chris Paul thing. I think they just might want to kick the can down a little bit to leave the door open
And
Chris
by the
Paul
way,
is,
it makes sense for Chris Paul to do that because he's not getting $30 million otherwise.
okay. And this is where the Klay Thompson thing gets interesting. With the Warriors, and the Warriors, I think, have some other avenues that they're trying to make big swings on. Let's just remember the Warriors tried to trade for LeBron James in February. Okay. This is the kind of operation they're running. And I think like they're waiting to see what happens with Paul George before they get into Klay Thompson. And I think that's one of the interesting things with Klay.
And it doesn't help ease hard feelings that have developed, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you go find the video of this interview that Dunleavy gave today, like he's being asked about Chris Paul, he's kind of like, not real sure what's going to happen. We'll see. We still got 24 hours. Like they're hedging on Chris Paul. So Klay is just sort of sitting there, like what's going on? So the question you have to ask yourself, if you're Klay, are you going to sit there and wait for the Warriors to go through their big swings? Or are you going to just take somebody else's money because he'll have offers on Sunday?
Well, but again, the other thing to think about is if the Warriors get Paul George, they're going to have it done well before the start of free agency. So
That's
they
true.
will have the ability to go back to Klay Thompson and say, hey, we've got Paul George done. Here's the number we can give you to sign you under the second apron. And by the way, if they do get Paul, let's total hypothetical, right? If they do get Paul George, the negotiation is very simple because they're going to have a certain amount of money under the second apron. They'll be able to give Klay Thompson and they will say, hey, Klay, here's what we can give you. And because of the second apron, we literally can't give you more than this because we'll be hard capped otherwise. And we can't fill out our roster. So this is what we can pay you. Do you want it or not? And that will make, frankly, I think the negotiation, if it comes to that, fairly simple because it's either going to be, okay, that's an acceptable number or it's not. But it's not going to be like, well, give me an extra $10 million. They could just say, well, we can't. This is the number we have.
Right.
Can't do more than that.
Please explain why, as of now, the Warriors are hard capped. They are now hard capped after something they did today.
They bought a pick in the second round, and by doing that, it hard capped them at the second apron, which is $189 million and change. And if they trade for Paul George, they would have to aggregate, put a bunch of players together to make the trade done, which would also hard cap them at the second apron. So one way or the other, they're not spending more than $189 million.
Just to be clear, and I know that our listeners are smart, but this is all new rules. There's a whole under the old system, which still technically exists until Sunday. Under the old system, there was a couple of things that you could do that would make you have a hard cap where literally you can't spend more. And it had to do with using your mid-level exception, your full mid-level exception, or using a sign and trade. Now there's a whole bunch of other things that hard cap you that actually make a stopper where you cannot spend more money. Two of those things are making a trade where you take in more money than you send out. As soon as you do that, you become hard capped. We have a whole bunch of new hard cap teams just in the last few days. The New York Knicks, at least right now, are headed towards a hard cap with the Bridges trade. The Oklahoma City Thunder are hard capped.
Well, not to confuse people further, but that hard caps you at the lower number.
But don't focus on the two different hard caps. The point is that there's a hard cap. I know what you're saying.
Sure.
But so the point is that, and one of the things that triggers a hard cap is if you give money out for a draft pick.
If you buy a pick or you put money in a trade to pay for salary or whatever.
So all of a sudden we've got a bunch of teams that are starting to get hard capped, and the Warriors did that today. And so now they are hard capped.
And by the way, this is going to cause because people care about trades, this is going to cause less trades to happen. I really think the league, and I've talked about this with people.
Yeah. The trade machine's going to need a makeover. I don't know if our trade machine can handle this.
I think in the last CBA, the NBA got too cute by half because their goal was to create a hard cap or something as close to it as possible. I'm sure our friends at the union, listen to the pod, are going to get very mad at me. That's fine. That's what the NBA was clearly trying to do. In a lot of ways, they have succeeded in that because teams are not going to want to go much above the second apron. But by adding all these other crazy rules in here about like, if you trade an $8 million player for a $9 million player, you're hard capped.
Yeah.
Or like the Knicks and Nets trade where the Mikal Bridges and Bojan Bogdanovic are within $1.5 million. But because one guy makes a little more than the other team's hard capped at the first apron. All this stuff is going to make it a lot harder for teams to make trades, and that's what the NBA wants, is for teams to make trades. So
that especially the one where like when the salaries are so close, like
yes.
that's just.
And by the way, that was not something that people originally knew, or I shouldn't say knew, because I'm sure very smart people with teams figured it out early on. It's not something that was readily aware to people until fairly recently that all of this stuff was coming, at least
it was
in
not
my sphere.
I did not know. I did not understand that until the Knicks trade this week, that if you took back more money, that you were hard capped. I learned it that night from Bontemps.
How many trades are dollar for dollar?
Zero.
Very few.
Almost
I mean,
none.
this is why Bobby Marks and I wrote a story on Tuesday before this trade happened about, or I think it was Monday actually, we posted about all these rules and how restrictive it was going to be and how much chaos it was going to cause. And then all this stuff has happened this week, and it's only reinforced that. And look, over time, I think the league's position would be, once we get through this period where all these contracts are bunched up because of COVID and the cap was flat, the cap's going to grow a lot and the league's going to sort of grow out of this stuff. Because if you are below the salary cap or you are below the tax, there's a lot of flexibility to make trades. Like the Pistons, or not the Pistons, the Blazers Wizards trade, the two salaries, Malcolm Brogdon and Dembiabia, were like $7.5 million apart, and it was a legal trade, which in the past it wouldn't have been. So they would say, if once you get through this part, there might be a lot more trades. But certainly, at least right now, it's going to be difficult for teams to make moves. And I think that's why it's going to be something to watch this week, because it's going to have a material impact on teams like Golden State, on teams like the Clippers, on teams like the Knicks. Like the Knicks are probably not going to be able to sign Isaiah Hartenstein in part because of these new rules. Like this is what the league was going for. Talent's going to be spread around and teams are not going to be able to keep everybody.
All right. One more option that's going to be important on Saturday. That's D'Angelo Russell. D'Angelo Russell has an opt-in. I think it's 19 million with the Lakers. If D'Angelo Russell opts out, the Lakers are in an interesting situation with LeBron. Now, you may have heard that Bronny James was drafted by the Lakers on Thursday. In and of itself, it's a remarkable moment in NBA history. The Laker, I know that there's going to be some hand wringing about some of it. LeBron has earned the right for him to ask for a player to be drafted. Like,
I mean, look, the other thing is, like, if the 55th pick doesn't pan out, I mean, that's pretty much what happens with the vast majority of 55th picks.
Right.
It's a much different
Wiggins
thing.
Being a notable exception.
It's a much different thing than if he'd been drafted 17th overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know, considering that Bronny James had cardiac arrest last July, and today he was drafted by the Lakers. And if you watch the videos that are out there on social media of him reacting to being drafted by the Lakers, and his mother, Savannah, who had to take the call last July that her son's heart stopped. And she came over and handed him the hat, and she's wiping away tears. I'm sorry, if you watch that and you think this is some sort of bad thing or whatever, we can't really have a conversation about it. So Bronny will try to develop over the next few years, like the majority of this draft, and either he will or he won't, and we'll track it like we will all the players in this draft. And
No, that's where I'll stop you. We will track it a little bit differently than all the players in this draft.
Yeah, I know. We'll track it. It'll be tracked. It'll be followed.
It certainly will be. Yes.
And it'll be a moment that when Bronny and LeBron play together, it will be one of the moments it'll be an NBA historical moment. It won't define the career of LeBron. It won't define next NBA season. It'll be a moment for everybody to take in. Right. And we'll go from there. And
like him being guaranteed a roster spot, it's not the first guy who's been guaranteed a roster spot because of family ties. It won't be the last. It ain't like his guaranteed
over
rotation spot. So,
yeah. The NBA is a merit-based operation for the most part.
Yes.
They're like,
Well, yeah, it's merit-based in the sense that Dame Lillard, when he was the face of the Blazers, his cousin was on either a two-way or on a roster spot.
We could go on for 45 minutes about this.
No, but I'm just saying, and Giannis Antetokounmpo and his brother have been both on the Bucks for the past few years.
J.R. Smith's brother was on the Knicks.
Yes,
we could go on and on about this.
Yes, that's my point.
Woj noted, if you really want to get into that stuff, we can start in the top of ownership and
for sure.
Look, this
the
is
bottom
line.
Here's the bottom line. The bottom line on the whole Bronny thing is he most likely outcome, if it works out, is he's something like Aaron Holiday, who's had a several-year career in the NBA. We'll see if he works out. We'll see if he doesn't. But draft him 55th. He didn't get a first-round pick. The Lakers used his first-round pick on him. The whole conversation about this would be far different. He got drafted with the third or fourth to last pick.
And the Lakers got Dalton Connect with their first-round pick with the 17th pick overall, a guy who was in the top 10 in many projections and is an interesting piece. And that is like now going to be a big thing to watch over the summer for the Lakers.
He's also a very old draft pick, and those tend to not go very well. But
okay,
he's
fine.
a shooter,
but
I'm just saying he's
to contribute right away. Like,
I know. I was just going to say,
I do think this is, oh my gosh, he's 23. The guy's like,
the track record of guys who are drafted at that age is very bad. That's just the truth. There's a reason
okay,
why.
Well, we can pick apart Dalton Connect throughout summer league and next.
Could I say the second sentence? The second sentence was
no interrupting.
The second sentence was JJ Redick has shown up, one of the great shooters of all time. What has he talked about? Everybody shooting the ball. And they drafted a shooter who, to your point, MacMahon, they probably are going to be able to have the opportunity to throw him out there right away and have him make some shots. And if he can, that will be a benefit to the Lakers, a team that we've talked about a lot, needed shooting. So
the Lakers came out of the draft with a very interesting first-round draft pick. Yep. Some people have argued that it could be one of the steals of the first round. It may not. It may be a disaster, but some people have argued the Lakers emerged from this draft with a very interesting player. With a very interesting player who can help them immediately. The Lakers draft is relevant and things happen. And the Bronny part of it is a longer.
I mean, the Lakers draft would have been relevant if you and I got drafted.
Well, the Lakers draft was not relevant last year. Okay, so where this is now interesting.
It was not.
Where this is now interesting.
Who they didn't draft, but that's a different story.
Where this is now interesting is if D'Angelo Russell opts out, the Lakers have a window to do something here.
Start Bronny at point guard?
If LeBron is willing to take less money than the max.
Yeah. I don't think that's happening.
I was going to say, go on.
This is not my idea. I didn't come up with this. If LeBron is willing to take less money than the max, they can open up the possibility of using the full mid-level. Now, it would have to be, it's not going to be $1 million. It's, quite a few.
Tell me the math.
You sure about that?
I'm sure about it. Yeah.
How much less?
Like around 10 or 12 million.
Ooh.
You sure it's all?
That's a lot less too.
I think it's around, I think if he would take around 38 or 39 instead of 50.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is he's going to take about 40 million less over the course of.
Well, listen, it may be a non-starter, but I'll tell you, it would definitely be a non-starter if they didn't draft Bronny.
Well, yeah, and then if I'm LeBron, my question is obviously for who? Who
exactly?
Are we going to get that's so much better for the full mid-level?
For sure, absolutely. Which is why it would not surprise me if LeBron, when he opts out, his deadline is Saturday too, when he opts out, that he doesn't sign right away.
Yeah.
That he sees what can happen here. What did Dirk do? When Dirk was 40, what did he do with his contract?
I mean, when he was, first of all, we can't compare Dirk at 40 to LeBron at 40.
I understand, but what did Dirk?
LeBron does what Dirk did. The Lakers are going to be fishing for like an actual real player. In
okay, well, but what did Dirk do?
Dirk took less. Dirk also never had.
Wasn't Dirk signing for like $2 or $3 or $5 million?
No, it was like 10 million. But
Dirk took less at 32. Dirk, he's right before they won the championship. Dirk was eligible for 4 years, 96. He took 4 years, 80, and that was just to ease the luxury tax bill. Like it was for flexibility. It was for flexibility, so Cuban could afford to fund a contender, not because it created cap space or like you're saying, this would actually create more money that they could spend.
Right. So look, and you're exactly right, MacMahon. It depends on who it would be for. But like, if Russell opts, by the way, Russell might opt in, and if Russell opts in, I think he becomes a trade candidate. But if Russell opts out, the Lakers will have a window to do something. And look, LeBron may shut the door shut, but like, I do think if they had a plan of who they could sign for the full mid-level, that they could take it to LeBron and he would at least listen.
It's interesting.
Okay, so that's another thing we're going to watch over the weekend. Now, another player who I think is going to opt out by Saturday, if he doesn't opt out by the time this pod posts, is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope from the Nuggets. Caldwell-Pope is he's under contract for $15 million. He can opt out of it. Calvin Booth, the general manager of let me get the exact quotes. The general manager of the Nuggets.
I got the quotes right here.
Okay, go ahead.
When you look at some of the teams that have been good in the past, they had to find a way to replace their fourth, fifth starter, 6 men off the bench, and still keep rolling. It would be nice if he's back. We'd have a lot of continuity together. But all the stuff I've looked at with lineup stuff and everything, Christian Braun is one of the best net rating guys in the league, as is KCP. So I think if Brown is a step in the starting lineup, I would project that we'll be okay if KCP doesn't return. And what I would say is Calvin Booth, KCP stands for Keep Championship Players. Be careful what you're saying. I think that would be a massive, massive blow to the
Nuggets. The Nuggets have his full bird rights. So if he opts out, they can pay him more than he could get offered elsewhere. Last year, when Bruce Brown left the Nuggets, they did not have his rights.
Yes.
The Pacers offered the $20 million. I think the Nuggets could go to $6 million. Wasn't that about right, Bontemps?
That's right.
It was a little over 6, but it was not. It was
they had 0% chance of matching the offer.
It was a 7-figure salary, and obviously, like the number got blown out of the water
for a guy who never made any money in his career. This is very simple. If the Nuggets don't sign Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, they didn't feel like paying him, and that goes back to ownership, which has a history of not paying all that much money, especially in luxury tax payments.
But based on what I've heard, KCP's decision is going to come down to Denver or dollars. And basically, I'm saying that the Nuggets aren't going to win a bidding war, from what I've heard.
Well, of course not.
They can change their minds, and
what you heard is backed up basically by what Booth just said on the record.
Exactly.
So that he made those comments on Wednesday. On Thursday, the Nuggets made a trade.
Oh, this is interesting.
To salary dump Reggie Jackson. 3 unprotected second round picks, which is, not going to bankrupt their franchise, but for a team that's already out a lot of picks going forward, is a significant outlay on a salary dump. It's one thing if you give second round
for a $5.2 million salary dump.
Right. So they give 3 seconds for a $5 million. Now it's going to be worth more than $5 million to them because of luxury tax.
The salary is $5 million. And when they did that, you know what I thought? I was like, holy crap. Nico Harrison's got to find 9 second round picks to salary dump Tim Hardaway Jr. That's going to be tough to do.
Well, that's funny, but my thing is, if you're going to let KCP walk, or you have the real possibility of KCP walking, which Booth is on the record is admitting, and you're going to trade Reggie Jackson with 3 second rounders, it can't be in a salary dump. It's got to be to bring something back with that $5 million.
No. It's because Reggie Jackson should not have been on the team last year. And the fact that they signed him to the tax MLE is part of why they lost in the playoffs, because Reggie Jackson wasn't good for them last year. And rather than having Bruce Brown on the tax MLE like the year before, they had Reggie Jackson on the tax MLE, who wasn't very good.
KCP, who is going to have a really nice market? KCP.
Yeah.
And, look.
So a team to watch for KCP is Orlando. You talked about Orlando maybe earlier.
Loves defenders.
Yeah. And Orlando's got money. So
Yep.
I would watch Orlando there. I mean, pretty much any team.
I mean, listen, the
But
76ers, the way things are shaping up, could
that's
do
true.
worse. I
That's
mean, you talk
that's
about
absolutely
like
true.
KCP is one of the, I'm not saying he's one of the elite wing defenders in the league, but he's a really good wing defender who hits a high clip as a
He's a
three-point
very
shooter.
good. He's a very good
Moves well
3D
without
guy.
the ball, and you don't have to run a bunch of stuff for him. He's a great complementary role player, and he would fit pretty damn well all playing next to Maxey and Embiid. He'd fit well with those young guys in Orlando. Obviously, he has fit phenomenally well in Denver. Fit great when he helped the Lakers win a championship. He's one of the really, really valuable role players in the league.
All right.
Well, look, the back end of that deal might not look great, but to your point, MacMahon, if you're the Nuggets and you've got Nikola Jokic, I mean, you can't be just having guys walk out the door. And if he walks out the door, this is like people are probably going to try to compare this to Bruce Brown because he left last year. This ain't Bruce Brown.
No,
it's totally different.
You can pay this guy.
That's right. This is an active choice to save money. And I will go back to refer to this article I wrote with Bobby. We led with quotes from Josh Kroenke, the chairman of the Nuggets and the Avalanche, son of Stan Kroenke, where he said this team was built under a different CBA and sort of left the door open to, well, there's new rules, so we'll see how we react to it. And they said all the right things at that press conference after they lost to the Wolves about, we're going to be competing for championships. We're going to do this stuff. KCP walks out the door. Denver drops down, to me, a pretty significant level in the Western Conference.
All right, while we're on
Brown's
Denver,
a nice player, but you're just losing him for nothing.
Good points. Two things else I want to bring up. We've seen a couple of players do extensions. Bam Adebayo a couple days ago. Jamal Murray is reporting to the Canadian national team to play in the Paris Olympics next week. Jamal Murray has 1 year left on his contract. Jamal Murray has not had an extension yet. Those are just statements of fact. That's all I'm going to say. The second thing I'm going to say is Aaron Gordon is also going into the final year of his contract at $22.8 million. They need to get an extension done with Aaron Gordon too. Now, if they let KCP walk and they get Murray and Gordon done and they go, listen, we had a core 5 and now we're going to be a core 4. And that's what the new reality is. And it's now on us to find the 5th, 6th, 7th guys. That's a reasonable thing. I mean, it may not be great for the Nuggets short term. They may take a little bit of a hit, but if they get those 2 extensions done, they can go, look, we had to make a decision and this is it. Are they getting those extensions done?
Well, they also don't have to make that decision because their ownership group has more money than God. So like they can afford to pay it. This is not a mom and pop shop with no money. I
agree, but I'm just saying that if that's where they end up if they get to September 15th and those other 2 guys are signed, I mean, I can't, assuming Jamal Murray wants to extend, I mean, in theory, he could still get the Supermax by playing out next season and making all NBA, but considering his injury history, I would be very surprised if he didn't. Well, I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know exactly what he's doing, but
sure.
Just, I want to point those out.
But those shouldn't, but to me, to MacMahon's point, I think we're giving the Kroenkes a pass if we say, well, if they sign those guys and they let KCP walk, it's fine. Like they're actively damaging one of the true legitimate championship contending teams in the league if they let Kentavious Caldwell-Pope walk over money. Now, look, if he signs up,
you'd be losing the 2 finishing pieces from the championship puzzle over a span of 2 years. That was a really good team. And Calvin Booth, to his credit, when he got promoted to GM after Tim Connelly left, he made 2 moves. He used the taxpayer mid-level.
Yep.
Signed Bruce Brown, and he made the trade to get KCP from the Wizards, and those were the two finishing pieces. To lose both of those guys over the next 2 years, that's tough, man.
Especially when you're basically not replacing them. And it'd be
Yeah,
hard,
and Christian
be
Braun is
extremely hard
Well,
to
I
replace
think
them.
he would argue that you're supposed to replace them with Christian Brown and Peyton
Well, but Christian Brown's
Watson.
on the team. Like, he's still playing a role.
I know.
That's
Well,
why that's where that argument falls away for me.
Well, I know, but that's what he's basically saying is that we're going to do next man up, and
Well,
you can
they better win.
Yeah.
They
All
better
right.
win.
We mentioned Philly a minute ago. Let's take a little bit of a stock in where Philly is right now. Do you know off the top of your head, Bontemps, what their cap space number is? 50? It's like 50.
It's around 60. I don't know the specific number, but they have a ton of money.
Okay,
Most of the league.
So, Paul George is out there. Like, until he's signed somewhere else or traded or whatever, I'm not going to rule that out. OG Anunoby, I don't think anybody ever thought that OG was really going to leave the Knicks. It just became more interesting when they got Bridges. It just sort of amped it up that they had to get that done.
Yeah, I'd say it's still until Paul George opts in. I'd say he's still option A for the Sixers.
Right. But their situation hasn't really changed. It's just with the Knicks improving and with the Celtics having won the title, it just increases the heat on them to start making some slams here.
I don't even know if it changes the heat that was on them because they already had a ton of heat on them. Like when they traded James Harden, they got back draft picks and expiring salaries, right? It was all geared towards making moves this summer to make the team a lot better. None of that has changed. Like what the Knicks do doesn't really have anything to do with that. And frankly, the Celtics winning the title doesn't really have anything to do with that because you still got Joel Embiid, who's into his 30s.
Tell it to WIP.
Well, but my point is, people let's say that Boston had lost to Dallas, right? It wouldn't change how anybody in Philly is thinking about where the Sixers are at. They're ready for them to get to the conference finals and beyond. It's irrelevant what everybody else is doing.
I would say the one thing that New York did that might, I'm not going to say it's going to ease any pressure in Philadelphia, but at least you don't have the oohs and be going to want to go to New York storyline out there anymore.
Well, that's true. I also think there's I think there's a chance Embiid could extend at some point too, and I don't think he's going anywhere. But yeah, look, I mean, the pressure's on Philly to get better because there's pressure on the Sixers to finally break through. And it doesn't have anything to do with me to those other teams. I think you said it right, Brian. Their position hasn't changed since the end of the season. Paul George is still sitting there. And if Paul George opts in and gets traded somewhere else, or he opts out and re-signs with the Clippers or does something else, they're still going to have to figure out moves to get this team up into contention in the East. And that was going to be the case no matter what else went.
Yeah. So who are some of the guys they could target? So KCP, I'm sure, is on their list if he opts out and is let go from Denver. DeMar DeRozan
is not going to be.
Yeah. So I know this has also been reported. I sort of floated it on McAfee yesterday, and then it got whatever. I have been told that Jimmy Butler has decided he's not going to extend his contract. Which, by the way, the Heat said they weren't going to do it. Pat Riley came out and said, we're not going to extend him right now. And so Jimmy basically accepted that. And his intention is to be full bore with the Heat this year. And to be with the Heat, though, he doesn't want to go anywhere. The Heat certainly could trade him. There's nothing that prevents the Heat from trading him. But I think the Heat want Jimmy Butler playing and playing well. Jimmy Butler wants to play in Miami. And I think Butler has an option in his contract after this upcoming season. So I think Jimmy is basically entering a Paul George zone, which is I'm going to go have a great season and hopefully get an extension, or I could opt out and become a free agent a year from now. I think his preference is to get an extension. I think he wants to finish his career in Miami, but there's not going to be from what I understand, and this has been communicated to the Heat, there's not going to be a extend me or trade me.
Right.
Jimmy Butler is Jimmy Butler's intention to remain with the Heat. So I don't think, doesn't mean Philly couldn't make the Heat some sort of offer that they would listen, but it wouldn't be a Jimmy initiated thing, at least not right now, from what I am told.
So, and look, go ahead.
No, back to Philly options. I mean, Paul George, like pretty significant drop off, assuming I think LeBron's probably staying with the Lakers. I think that's a fair.
I like the chances of it.
I think that's a fair assumption at this point. Like, does DeMar DeRozan in his mid-30s move the needle for you?
Depends on the
Klay
contract.
Same thing.
Well, listen, here's what I would say. We've talked a lot about the restrictions around the league and how that can impact things. I think if you have salary cap space and you are in the market to try to be good next year and sign good players, you could really make hay with where the market is headed. Because I think that a few guys are going to really get paid. We saw OG Anunoby get paid. Paul George is obviously going to get paid. But there's going to be, I think, a cratering of the market outside of a few guys because there's not a lot of places looking to spend money. And there's not a lot of homes for the many guys that are out there that are free agents. And if you're a team like Philly, if you don't get Paul George and you're patient, maybe you can sign 3 or 4 solid players. And if you do that and you bring back Nick Batum, Kelly Oubre, Kyle Lowry on top of it, all of a sudden, maybe you are an 8 or 9 man deep team like the Knicks, except you have Joel Embiid. And for as great as the Knicks are, they don't have Joel Embiid.
Also, if you sign those players to 1-year contracts, like if you see what Indiana did, Indiana basically turned Bruce Brown into a trade exception. Yep. That was like the paving. They had to put in draft picks, but the paving piece to get Pascal Siakam was using the $20 million in cap space on Bruce Brown. So if you don't like your options,
or you just sign guys to good contracts. Maybe you could sign guys to 3-year contracts that are good because of where the market's at. Regardless, if you sign 3 or 4 good players to good contracts, it's a great point. You have these draft picks. You then have potential guys you could trade later. Because MacMahon makes a good point. The Knicks, they can maybe trade players later, but the Knicks are not nearly as well positioned to make a home run trade for some star guy that's available as they were 3 days ago.
The contender that's positioned to make a home run trade and will be for the foreseeable future is Oklahoma City. But the Knicks are, for so long, that conversation started with the Knicks because they were a good team in a desirable market with all the extra picks, and now they're out of that conversation. Now they've upgraded their roster.
For sure.
But they took that swing.
And I just think that it's hard to sort of game out what that alternate path would look like right now because you have to sort of let the market settle and see where things sit. But I think if Paul George doesn't show up there, what I would be trying to do is waiting to see where this market settles and trying to get a bunch of guys in the door and having real depth around Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid to all-star hubs of your team. And I think there's going to be real potential for the Sixers to potentially put together a pretty darn good roster, even if they don't get Paul George.
I agree.
You wouldn't try to pull KCP out of Denver?
Well, I mean, I think you could sign KCP and then maybe 2 other guys. That's my point. Like maybe you sign KCP and 2 other players. Like I think that's a real path you could go down.
This is a generalization. You've heard me say this before. You're going to hear me say it again. It's a generalization. In this current rule structure, your third salary, you've got to be very careful about. What I mean is your third biggest salary. Mm-hmm. You can have 2 max players, which is what Philly is going to have when they eventually sign Tyrese Maxey. That third salary, now in the case of the Knicks, they don't have 2 max players. In fact, the Knicks have no max players, and so it's not a classic situation. It's not a one size fits all. But your third salary can't be Bradley Beal. You can't have a $50 million player not playing like a $50 million player.
Well, you also, you also can't have Tobias Harris making $40 million.
Exactly right.
But if you turn Tobias,
you can have a $40 million player, but he better play up to his salary.
Right. And if you take last year's Sixers, what I'm sort of proposing, and I'm not even saying this is necessarily how it's going to go, but like a way that it could go well is if you essentially take Buddy Hield and Tobias Harris and turn them into 3 or 4 players that could be impact players. If you do that and have the rest of the Sixers come back, that's a pretty darn good team. So that is, I think, a real path that's potentially available. And like Tobias Harris is a good example. Look around the league and tell me where Tobias Harris, who's coming off making $40 million, there's not an obvious home for him to make over the mid-level. And he's not alone to me in that regard. There's going to be, I think, some real bargain opportunities to sign good players to less dollars than you would think. And if Daryl Morey can do that and surround those two all-stars he's got with depth, like if you told me 10 days from now the Sixers have a deeper team than the Knicks in an overall aggregate sense where they've got the best player and similar depth, I think that is within the realm of possibility, at least. And we'll see if that is ultimately what happens. But the pressure's there regardless. They gotta strike big this summer.
But that's the thing. Like what you're talking about is a prudent, modern, new age approach to this. And I think the Philly fans and everything seeing elsewhere may not be thrilled if, like Woj is reporting, Nick Batum back on a 2-year, $19 million deal or whatever, $22 million deal or whatever. So,
I mean, Philly fans aren't going to be happy either way. So they are understandably frustrated with the fact the team hasn't broken through. But the Sixers have waited a year to pounce on this free agency, didn't sign Tyrese Maxey the extension, traded James Harden, saved the salary slots in the season, didn't trade for guys then. Like, it's all built toward, all right, got to cash your chips in this summer and get players. So let's see if they can do it.
All right. Before we go, I want to touch on one of the teams that did something pretty fascinating on draft nights. That's the Minnesota Timberwolves. We have talked off and on this pod for months about the financial cliff that the Timberwolves are facing because all of this money comes on and they have uncertain ownership and uncertain tax history. Well, I guess we can take a step back from worrying about that. Because look, I am not going to sit here and tell you about how Rob Dillingham is going to fit into the way the Wolves are going to play next year. But Bontemps, can you detail? So on draft night, the Wolves, it's pretty unusual for a team that's in the conference finals to trade into the lottery. And that's what happened. It was one of the biggest things that happened on draft night. The Wolves trade into the 8th spot with the Spurs, give up a 2031 first rounder and
protected first and a 2030 swap. Basically all they had left after the Gobert trade.
Yeah, and the swap is interesting because the Spurs already have a 2030 swap with the Mavericks. So like one of those swaps ain't going to matter. And I don't know, maybe you can split the swaps, whatever. But yeah, it was not like they gave up what they could, but it wasn't like, I didn't think it was some kind of like astronomical price.
They got two unprotected bites at the apple later. Like that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But the thing that was stunning to me was that how much is this going to cost them?
Well, yeah, no, it's going to add to the luxury tax bill.
It's their Bobby Marks projected they went from around $56 million in luxury tax payments to $84 million in luxury tax payments.
It's interesting also because the Wolves, because of all these dorky rules that we're talking about, really had to hit us as far as like, dude, how are they going to add players to the roster, like who can make a difference for the foreseeable future? And they figured a way to go get a guy who.
Well, they did make a salary dump trade today during the second round.
It wasn't a non-rotation player.
But listen, moving on from Wendell Moore, like they did, saved them a lot of money. Like that's not an insignificant thing. It probably saved $10 million off of that tax number I just said.
But I'm going to have to retire from worrying about the Wolves' money because I'll just shut up.
Hey,
I guess they're fine.
Glenn Taylor's, he'll be okay, and especially if he's got A-Rod and his buddy who, back in that nice little owner suite, paying 36% of the bill. He'll be all right. Now, Tim Connolly better be right about Rob Dillingham to add this kind of bill.
He was extremely effusive about him.
I would think. And, like the idea makes sense. Hey, this is a guy who's going to, give you some scoring juice off the bench for the next couple of years, then probably take over for Mike Conley as a starting point guard. Is apparently a heck of a.
Hey, Tim Conley's track record of drafting is pretty good.
Yeah, for the Wolves and the Jazz.
He loves bringing that up, Bontemps.
Or and the Nuggets, I should say.
I don't think you meant to say the Jazz on that one. But
no, I didn't mean to say the Jazz. I meant to say the Nuggets.
He meant to say Gobert because it was a Nuggets pick.
Yes,
and Donovan Mitchell was also a Nuggets pick.
That's right.
But if he's right about this, then they've added a dynamic offensive player who's going to be starting alongside Anthony Edwards in the not too distant future, and they hope for a long time. It's an interesting bet here.
I mean, it's an interesting bet on a few levels. I mean, because you look at it, they trade for a guy that's probably not going to help him very much next year, and maybe. I mean, look, what's the best case? Let's say, what's the absolute best case scenario?
That he gives them some pretty nice spark off the bench.
He's a spark plug off the bench that probably doesn't play much in the playoffs, right?
The scouts that I talked to said he's like Lou Williams would be like something that would be.
Yeah, like I mean, there were a
but
lot
not
of
immediately.
Williams or Jamal Crawford comps.
Yeah,
that's
not
my
immediately.
point. Like they didn't really have any draft capital to move, right? They take all of it and they go get Rob Dillingham. And yeah, he's probably if it works out, he's the long-term successor to Mike Conley. But this is a team that was in the West Finals that, for example, Kyle Anderson played a lot of minutes for this team and would cost somewhere in the same neighborhood, maybe a little bit more than Rob Dillingham. I assume they're not also signing Kyle Anderson. So, like, it's just an interesting bet when at the end of the day, over the next year or two, when you would think this team has its best chance to win as Rudy Gobert starts to hit the wrong side of the age curve, Rob Dillingham's probably not making a huge impact on their chances in the playoffs.
By the way, if I was Rudy Gobert
bet.
And I saw this spending, I was like, okay, when are we going to schedule our discussion for contract extension? Because Gobert is contract extension eligible, and he's also got to play in the Olympics this summer.
Well, and he's got diapers to pay for now, so
that's true.
Also true.
All right. Well, we got a lot happening in the league. There'll be a lot more going on we'll see if we need an emergency pod between now and Monday, but our next pod is scheduled for Monday. I know we've been all sort of on a weird schedule here, but we'll see. But by Sunday night, when we record that sucker, there's going to be
I suspect if there's a pod between now and Sunday night, it's Paul George dependent, I would say.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Maybe it will be. We'll leave it open. Thank you to Dan and Sean, our producers, filling in for Jackson. Jackson, tapped out. He's had enough. And thank you to Bontemps and MacMahon. Thank you for listening to the Hoop Collective. We will talk to you soon.